All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from snowed in and icebound Atlanta. Wish I could be there with you. I couldn't hear anything of Dean's introduction, but he probably told you my name is David Norris, and this presentation is going to cover an issue that I'm a little bit passionate about because I think it gives us in the training department quite a bit of grief as our industry evolves more and more into the digital distance learning and web deployable learning technologies. And that is, how do we transition existing instructor-led training into e-learning? And just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I hold a certified professional learning and performance improvement from the American Society of Training and Development in Alexandria, Virginia, a Master's of Science in Instructional Design and Technology, and 26 years and then some in the industry, both delivering and designing instruction and presenting those curriculums. So that's kind of the background I'm going to come from. I work a lot with the aircraft industry in Wichita, Kansas, and there is a lot of training that both pilots, mechanics, and other employees in the aircraft industry have to take. And so we're constantly being tasked with challenges of taking existing training into the e-learning world, and that's where I'm going to come from today with you. The problem is, you're probably well aware, many of you have also probably been challenged by your leadership to take some existing courseware and turn it into e-learning and deploy it on the web. And as you can probably relate, to the layman, taking existing instructor-led training, which I'm going to call ILT on my slides, into e-learning sounds simple enough. And so a lot of times they think it's very easy to do. They think it's very simple, very inexpensive. And if you've ever been down this road, sometimes it can be anything but those things. And the way that we project manage this is ultra critical to the outcome of the project and its success. So as we go through, first off, I can see half of the room, but could I get roughly a show of hands? Who's ever been tasked with turning existing instructor-led training into some kind of web deployable e-learning? Yeah, I'm seeing some hands go up out there. So again, it's becoming more and more commonplace as we do this, anywhere from in the school systems all the way through the university environment and also into the corporate world as well. But the objective of this presentation and then the follow-on webinar, which will present also an additional supplementary additional information on this topic that we won't cover today, sometime in the first quarter of this year, is going to be, when you're challenged with taking instructor-led training and turning it into some kind of e-learning product, what should you do? What should you say to those folks involved, the course champions, the SMEs, subject matter experts that you'll have to work with, etc. And then, of course, how to project manage all of that. See if I can get my slide to advance here. And what to watch out for during your project management of that transition of that courseware. Those of you that have transitioned instructor-led training into the e-learning world can probably relate to this. But have you ever heard this type of phraseology about, well, the course is already created, so therefore all that needs to be done is it just needs to be digitized and hosted, and therefore when you were given those directions, what kind of time frames and directions were you given in your experiences? Now, I'm not there to be able to respond directly to questions, so Dean, I won't be able to hear what they say. If you wouldn't mind repeating some of the feedback from the floor. Anybody that's been in this position before, what kind of directions and time frames were you given by the person that assigned you that challenge of transitioning the courseware? Short, yeah. Very common to hear that. What else? Anybody else? Small budget, yeah, should be cheap, should be easy, should be quick. Exactly. Those are the kinds of paradigms, misconceptions, and quite frankly, minefields that we can be faced with as instructional designers, as project managers in the training world, etc., when this topic comes up. So therefore, our topics today for this 45 minutes or so that I'm going to be with you are to cover some of those paradigms, expectations, etc., that we have to overcome with the champions and the subject matter experts, et cetera, that we're dealing with to be able to meet their expectations effectively. And then some today and mostly in the follow-on webinar that we'll do sometime in the first quarter, I'm going to talk more in detail about some of those pitfalls and concerns, cost-benefit analysis that's effective to the transition process here, how to deal with the kickoff meeting for transitioning from instructor-led product into e-learning, and an overall process and our roles and responsibilities as instructional designers and project managers to each of those things. So that'll give you an idea kind of where we're going. But as we've already defined, we face a host of challenges here when someone comes in with this idea of transitioning an instructor-led product that currently exists into something that's digitized and web deployable. And we run into all of these things that we've already talked about. It already maybe exists in the instructor-led world, so we just need to wave our wand at it, transition it into a digital product and host it. That's all cheap, easy, quick, without any problems and so forth. And those are the things that can cause us a lot of problems. And folks, I can't stress this enough, at least in my experience. If somebody wants to back this up or contest it from the floor, I'm open to that as well. But how we handle this from the immediate start of the project, in my humble opinion, can make or break that project. Because if we let these SMEs and course champions get very far downstream expecting an easy transition, a cheap transition into the digital world with an existing instructor-led product, we're going to have a train wreck probably at the end before long if we don't correct those problems right out of the chute and get them understanding from the get-go that while this is not impossible, and folks, I don't want to leave anyone with the misunderstanding today that it's impossible to transition a product, because it's not. It's done all the time, both in the corporate world and the public education world, the university level, et cetera. It's done successfully, but everybody has to realize what they've truly taken on as a project for that to be a successful and smooth process. And that's kind of, again, where I want to go with this. But again, getting it off on the right foot is critical in this transition process. So let's kind of delve into, to begin with, some of those paradigms and misconceptions in a little bit more detail. The course may very well be already in existence, being taught in a classroom somewhere, perhaps by a very seasoned instructor that's been teaching the course, or an instructor staff that's been teaching the course for quite some time. And so the paradigm or misconception that can often exist out there in course champions and subject matter experts is, well, this course already exists. I would challenge that. Does it really exist in terms of e-learning and web deployment and other types of utilizations of that course, if it exists only in the instructor-led environment today? Yes or no? I'll open that to the floor. What would anybody think? Does it exist? I'm sorry? A lot of no's. Okay, we're right. Certainly in terms of yes or no, I would say the answer would be no. It's got some foundational material already in existence for us, that's true. And a lot of the research for the transition to e-learning courseware may have already been done and be contained in that product as it exists today. But I would agree with you that no, in terms of it being existing and able to be digitized and hosted as is, I would say no, it really doesn't exist. In a sense, we're starting from scratch with this product. So, true or false, does the instructor-led training on the left equal what we're going to deploy in the web or in the digital world, even if it's just CBT? Help me out, Dean. What are we seeing or hearing? Yes, a lot of no's. I would agree with that, in a sense, those are, if my animation will work here, those are essentially two different worlds. And that is a concept that I would stress that needs to be understood well by both course champions and subject matter experts right at the start of a transition process, taking a course from the instructor-led world into the digital world. Because, and honestly, it's been my experience that if they understand that well at this stage, then a whole lot of the other shocks and battles that they're going to otherwise experience just won't happen, because they understand they're creating a totally different animal now for the web than what might be being taught right down the hall and has been being taught for 5 years, 6 years, whatever. And if they have this understood, that, you know, we're talking about a completely different world that we're going to launch a completely different product in than is being taught down the hall, that's a lot smoother transfer over that ground than might otherwise be the situation. Okay, I've been doing a lot of the talking here for about 10 minutes, so I thought it might be appropriate for a little exercise here. It looks like we've got groups of 2 and maybe groups of 3s as the tables go back. Dean, is that pretty representative? Okay, what I'd like you all to do is kind of in groups of 2s or 3s as you're setting together, and I think my picture here in my video is covering this up on the time frame, but that's okay, is for about the next 3 or 4 minutes, I'd like you at each table to try to formulate a list of all the differences that you can think of that exist between instructor-led training products and those same types of products that would exist in an e-learning world. And after a few minutes of that, after you've had a little time to think about it, we'll have a report out from each group, and we'll share that information with the rest of the room. All right, Dean, I'm ready to stand by if you're ready to let them loose for about 3 or 4 minutes. Skilled enough photographer to know what to do without my coaching. I don't know what you're showing me there. Oh, could be. Okay, thanks. Sounds good to me. Dean, is there any kind of a walk-around mic available that you could take around and so I could hear what they have to say, or other people could hear?
Can we do it?
Okay.
going to give some comments. Sure, be happy to.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir. Will I be able to hear them? Okay.
I didn't mean to issue out again, but I saw the sweat.
Why am I panicking? I'll just go off to the airport now.
Okay. Okay.
Some people can even skip points.
All right, everyone. If everyone will return to their seats here, let's discuss some of the ideas that you came up with.
I can have everybody's attention.
Who wants to go first?
Who wants to go first and share what they came up with? Good.
Okay, we had that in the classroom situation. You actually can see, I get the personability. You know, you can actually see the students' faces, etc. when they going through the process. But in ILT, we think there's more individual engagement because it's you and the computer and whatever you're engaged. You're not. There's no other distractions, etc. going on.
Excellent.
I wasn't able to. I'm sorry.
Let's see. So the exercises will be different. Group activities, your interactivity will be different. You have support of your AV team in ILT, which you don't have that with other technical problems that could occur, or the time differences between a 2-hour ILT, let's say, needing to be condensed to a 10 or 15-minute WBT.
Or could you just repeat what they say? Okay. I was not. Sounds like some great feedback, though. A lot of people had a lot of ideas. Unfortunately, I'm not able to hear them. I wish I was. Is that pretty much? Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, let me drive on to the next slide here. Oops, went one too fast. Let me ask you this though, in the floor, and I'm not asking for feedback on this. I just want you to keep this in your mind as food for thought. But as you were coming up with this list, did you find these issues and items and things to put on your list obvious differences or not? And if they were or weren't obvious, why or why not? And the reason I want you to think about that is that will give you some good bases with which to approach your SMEs and your champions, et cetera, right at the start of the transition to e-learning process with this, because they quite likely are not going to think of those things without our help and our coaching, to make them aware of those issues, make them aware of any of the challenges associated with each of those issues, and so forth. And that, quite frankly, in a transformation process, is one of the ways that we in the training world make our money, helping them through them, quite frankly, into a successful transition. I'm having a little bit of lag in my slides here, Dean. Let me, all right. As you know, there's quite a bit of difference between the e-learning world and the instructor-led world, and I've kind of used some graphic representation of those here. Can everyone see my cursor if I'm putting it on the classroom right here? Okay, good. So, as you know, in an instructor-led environment, we have a fairly controlled environment in which we have everybody brought together. We can regulate light, temperature, sound, distractions, noise, etc. that can be quite different in the e-learning world. Down here, if you can see the guy on the beach with his laptop, okay? When we deploy things across the web, and the more deployable we make them, where they can be done on iPads and tablets and iPhones and things like that, the less control that we have on the environment in which those people are utilizing our products. Therefore, in what's in an existing ILT product may not address distractions at all, or certainly not on the same level and type of distractions that we might have to deal with. One thing that might help is if we're planning on people doing these web deployable e-learning products as we're transitioning from the ILT into the e-learning environment, right at the start of the product training, we tell the learner, okay, you're probably going to be taking this at your desk where you might be trying to do training while people see you at your desk, or coming up to you and talking to you about things. Your telephone may be ringing, things like that. So here's a way you can minimize distractions. You can put up a do not disturb sign. You can put your telephone on silent, things like that, to minimize the amount of interruptions that other people bring you. But also, one of the big common ones that we have to deal with in the office environment with web deployable training is distractions people might willingly go to, like answering an instant message or answering an email or surfing the web. And all of these are things that we would want to design into the e-learning product that quite likely probably don't exist at all in the ILT product, or would certainly exist differently. Would everyone agree with that, or have any input from the floor about that? All right, then moving over to the right, where we have the gentleman with the piece of whiteboard behind him here, and he's talking to a group of people. We have one of the biggest differences and one of the most obvious and sometimes the most overlooked differences in the instructor-led world from the e-learning world, and that is the facilitator or the instructor. Now, depending upon the level of sophistication that we design into the e-learning product, where we might have a visual or virtual instructor that would guide the learner through, sometimes shelf life, budget, things like that that are in the product that we're transitioning may not warrant the expense of having a virtual instructor. So therefore, we would want to design the product in such a way that the facilitator is not there. However, the things that the facilitator would otherwise accomplish with the learner still are accomplished in the e-learning environment down below here, if I can get my cursor up, where I have just visual on the screen and I have audio through the speakers. Those are my two tools that I can utilize, and really the only two tools at my disposal with an e-learning product to get anything across. The other would be on-screen text to be part of the visual on the screen. But much like an instructor-led environment where we would have to handle people and disabilities that might come into play, we have those same kinds of concerns in an e-learning product where we have to have accessibility options for folks that have disadvantages of hearing, disadvantages of sight, things like that. And so we would want to make sure that we keep those same concerns aware as we go from the instructor-led environment into the e-learning environment. Our third graphic at the top here is the individual attention offered by the facilitator or the instructor. You can see the young man here, instructor, diagramming something and say an after class session with the young lady here that she might have an individual question about. There's two schools of thought, and I'm sure you've all been very experienced at hearing these on how interactive is e-learning, where we have discussion boards, forums, webcams. How do the shy people deal with e-learning compared to how they would deal with the instructor-led types of environments as well? And you know, we can make arguable cases back and forth for both, that the shy people get far more participation and therefore far more out of it when they're in an e-learning environment and they're doing something in print rather than speaking up in a room full of people. I've also had people tell me that while they might have been very shy type people, they enjoyed a classroom environment where they could listen and watch the interaction back and forth between the students and the instructor, and they got as much or more out of that than they would have if they'd have actually spoke up in class. So there's certainly two different schools of thought that we could argue on that. But one thing that we would have to design into the e-learning product down below that interaction, you see some kind of a sample chat room, discussion board, forum, things like that. And we can make various options of that entirely confidential to where people, as you know, would only be able to access it if they had a password from the class, things like that. So it's not an entirely public forum out there on the web. But again, we'd want to have them have the option, particularly in an asynchronous environment where they might get stuck and the instructor not be online at a certain time and a certain date to where they could ask questions. They need to be able to access some kind of help, technical help for the computer and digital side of it, as well as the content side would have to be designed into that e-learning as well. And as you see in the far right graphic at the top, we have a lot of classroom interaction going on there that we could also structure if we felt like it helped us better accomplish the teaching objective into the digital world using webcams, Skype, much like we're doing today, although that was pretty unplanned on my part. I was hoping to be there in beautiful Charleston with you all. But where we can have the students see each other, know what they are in terms of what they look like, who they are, so they can recognize people, they can see interactions. I know from the instructor point of view, one of the things I've always enjoyed about classroom instructing is the ability to kind of read the audience. And I'm sure that those of you that do classroom instruction know exactly what I mean there. I can see the looks of confusion or the looks of agreement or disagreement that might cross people's faces while I'm talking, that unless I had a webcam of those individuals, I would not otherwise be able to see, even in a synchronous type environment. And so sometimes that can be very, very advantageous. While it might increase the technological needs and sometimes increase the budget, that can certainly be a very valuable asset to the training world and help not only accomplish the teaching objective, but also the business objective or organizational objective behind the training and the whole reason for it. So I know that one thing that we would want to do, though, is, again, plan into the training some discussion for perhaps people that are new to that environment. I know that, well, let's just say I'm not 21 anymore, and when I was getting my online master's degree, had very little experience in this kind of technology, and so we had a guest lecturer at the university that was deployed over the web one night at a certain date and time, and everyone in the class would log on and synchronously watch this lecture from this young lady who was giving us from North Carolina. And so it's a very cold winter night, just much like it is here today in everybody's locations. And so that night I came home from work, threw a few logs on the fireplace, put on my comfortable pajamas and my scrappy looking t-shirt, and sat down and logged into class. And all of a sudden everybody's image started popping up on the screen around me. And guess what my classmates were seeing was they were seeing me in my pajamas and my scruffy looking t-shirt. And so I had to very quickly dismiss myself and go change into something far more appropriate and come back to class. So again, a little heads up warning might be in need there in our design of the training to tell people that may not be experienced with that technology how to use it. how to be ready to be on camera, how to be ready to hear their voice, things like that. Or again, the accessibility issues come into play. Maybe some people can't participate for some accessibility reason or another, and we have to have a workaround to that. So there's a whole lot of differences, as you guys probably were able to discuss there while I was unable to hear you there in the feedback and interaction sessions, that come with this world that, again, probably our champions and our subject matter experts will not think of without our coaching and our bringing it up to them. So then to move along, this slide, where you see we're debuting the new changes that are coming out on the Ben Ford 5100 Umpty widget, which is just a fictional product I made up for this. But a lot of times we might get tasked for things to be turned into digital deployable products that were perhaps nothing more than a simple stand-up briefing or a presentation at a sales meeting or something, and they want us to make it into a training product and deploy it across the web. Well, my department got handed something like that a year ago, where they were coming out with a new type of airplane at a local airplane manufacturer, and they literally handed us the briefing that was given to the senior leadership team, that as you see going down this slide, there might be some topics to discuss that were fairly deep and involved and technical for each one of those topics, and that was basis for what we had to make the training course out of. And the people that presented it to us were saying, oh, the course is all digitized, it's ready and everything. You just need to turn it into something that's, workable on the web and go. Well, again, this kind of slide might have been something that was on the wall in that stand-up briefing or that presentation at the meeting that was talked from for 45 minutes, an hour, something like that. But where was the audience focused during that 45 minutes or an hour? On these items on the screen the whole time, or on the person doing the talking? Yeah, I'd agree with you. The instructor, the facilitator, the briefer, the person in the front of the room is really the focus. The slide is there backing them up and being a support tool or a supplemental tool. It's the person doing the talking that's getting the information across and the teaching objective across. So when it comes to an e-learning environment, is this slide already created and ready to deploy? I would say no. I would say that there's a lot of work that might cover the same exact information that presenter talked about for that 45 minutes or an hour that slide was on the wall. But you could imagine if you were sitting in front of a computer screen for 45 minutes of audio talking to you off of this slide, and this slide never changed for 45 minutes, you're going to get pretty bored pretty fast. So therefore, there's a lot of work that has to go into making digital, web deployable, effective, and engaging learning product out of this slide alone. And that's going to take a lot of time and possibly a lot of money, because as it stands right now, the courseware doesn't exist on this slide like it should exist for the digital world. I think my video might be covering part of this, but sometime during my past, I taught Navy and Marine Corps pilots, and we taught them the systems of the aircraft as part of their training, and then we put them in a simulator. And this electrical schematic took a lot of our time in the classroom, and I would have this slide on the wall for the better part of a day sometimes, talking about some of the things that you see listed down the left side of the graphic here, locating componentry, how many components there are in the electrical system, voltage outputs, voltage limitations, circuit protection, etc. And I always felt like this was a very, very, Ryan, can we fix that? We have housekeeping vacuuming in the next room. I hope that's not coming over the microphone. But anyway, there's a lot of things on this slide that, quite frankly, I never was terribly happy with throwing this much stuff up on the wall at one time in a classroom environment either. But the Navy being the Navy had certain requirements we had to live with. But if you could imagine talking about this particular schematic with just this schematic on the screen for the better part of 8 hours of digital training, and how effective and how engaging that would be after about 12 minutes of the learner's time, you can imagine sitting there with their their eyes crossed and kind of half asleep and zoned out, we've lost them very quickly if we use this existing instructor-led graphic with no effective facilitation, animation, other things like that. And that's one of the big advantages that we have in the digital world, is that we can do all kinds of failures of componentry. We can trace circuits, make power go from the battery over to the hot bus and generators and on and on and on with digital products that we would otherwise be doing with colored markers and whiteboards and things like that in the classroom. But again, in the classroom, I have the advantage of the facilitator being the focus and the slide being the supplemental tool. Whereas in the digital world, I have only the digital tools to make or break the teaching objective. And so that's something I would have to get my SME and my course champion to understand, is this existing graphic may be wonderful in a classroom where I can use it to supplement my lecture, but to use this as the sole digital product isn't going to work. And it's going to take a lot of other types of effort in digital product creation to effectively accomplish that teaching objective, because it does not match it right now for the digital world. All right. So going back to the paradigm of cheap and easy, this is another thing that I'd like to get across to my champion for sure, because they're the one that's going to be paying the bills on this product that we're developing. And if they think it's going to be cheap, easy, quick, and all of a sudden the schedule starts dragging, the bills start coming in, and they're far more in number than they thought they were going to be at the very start of this because we didn't properly prepare them, we're back to the train wreck that I was saying that the whole point of this lecture is to try to help you and your champion prevent. Now, let me ask you a question here. Would anyone care to shoot a number at me, an annual expenditure on e-learning development across corporate America every year? Dean, are we getting any input from the floor, or should I just give the answer? You want me to just give the answer? You got a lot. Okay, well, great. Well, the official answer is $30 million a year go into developing e-learning products. Now, given that, and by the way, the source for this information comes from Barbara Carnes of Carnes and Associates out of St. Louis. You can find this on the web along with a lot of other great information she's got at www.maketrainingstick.com. That's the source for this information. But out of that $30 million annually spent on corporate e-learning development, she did some research and asked 5,000 adults that took e-learning in the corporate world, how many of them reported a positive application of e-learning back on the job with positive results. And as you can probably guess, it wasn't very impressive. It was actually less than 10%. If it'll pop up here. Come on, slides. It was only 9%. Oh, darn it. It was only 9% of the adult learners. Come on. It's lagging a bit around here, Dean. I'm sorry. You going to start that presentation? Back us up one, if you would. Okay, well, basically, if you can catch us up to where 9% shows up on the bottom, I'll stay talking in the meantime so our learners aren't wasting their time. But as you can see, we annually get a pretty small return on our investment in the e-learning world, and particularly when we're talking about bringing existing instructor-led training into the e-learning environment. That's got these dismal numbers behind it in terms of, we spend $30 million a year trying to transition existing instructor-led products into the e-learning world, and we get less than a 10% effectivity rate. That's not very impressive. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I give you that information so that when you're in the C-suite talking to the course champion who's advocating taking this existing instructor-led training into the digital world, and you give them research numbers like that, they're going to set up and take notice of that and ask, how can we prevent that from happening with this project? Because I'm going to have to answer for that money that's spent I'm going to have to answer for those times and dollars that are going to be invested in transitioning this product. And if later on people are reporting a less than 10% effectivity out of that transition process, I don't want to have to answer for that. So you, as the professional training person, the workforce learning professional, instructional designer, whatever your title reads, can you please guide me through a design process that will give us far more impressive numbers than just less than 10% for that kind of money? All right, Dean, I'm going to try to move us forward one. We'll see how this goes. Okay, now speaking of cheap, this came from Brian Chapman's website, www.chapmanalliance.com. And Brian has a great article out there on his website about how long it takes to create e-learning. I believe the actual title is How Long Does It Take to Create E-Learning? And in that research Brian conducted, he found lengths of time as well as dollars spent on various levels of e-learning products. And he defined level 1 e-learning products as a basic product consisting of what might be thought of as perhaps a PowerPoint presentation with a test at the end. Okay, you've got some content pages, some text, some graphics, maybe some simple audio like a narrated PowerPoint, those kinds of things, and some test questions at the end. Now, it was staggering here. Just to speed things up, I'm gonna go ahead and show you the number, but Brian found that on average it took over $10,000 per hour of tangible and intangible dollar expenditures to create 1 hour of basic e-learning. When you're thinking salaries, benefits, materials bought, materials contracted, software that you used to create it, even basic level 1 stuff doesn't come real cheap. Okay, level 2 information here. Come on, slides. Dean, can you help us? Okay. Level 2, interactive some, about 25% more interactive than level 1, allowing some learners to perform some virtual try-it type exercises. Perhaps they're self-guided through the learning. They might have to do some matching exercises or pairing or assembly using the mouse with click and drop or click and drag. And there's some liberal use of multimedia. For example, like every slide might be narrated. There's some embedded video. There's some animations that start upon start of the slide, things like that. And Brian found in his research there that it costs over $18,000, tangible and intangible dollars, to create 1 hour of level 2 e-learning, because you're using some considerable software, you're taping audio. And by the way, it's a good spot to mention it, but taping audio is something that instructor-led training doesn't have to do. And in fact, in a lot of instructor-led training that I've been asked to transition, there is no script yet. That's step 1, is just to define on paper what is said on every single slide all the way through in enough detail, and then you go back, wordsmith it, talk to the SME, and get it all straight in terms of a script, and then send it out for audio taping. And that's something a lot of times that nobody even thinks about until they get into the e-learning world. But again, over 18 grand per hour to create 1 hour of level 2 e-learning. Okay, level 3 e-learning, very advanced, highly interactive, possibly involving a simulation type of situation like using SimWriter, or some kind of a serious game-based learning product using avatars, Second Life figures, things like that, custom interactions, those kinds of things. And again, this really doesn't come cheap. That can sometimes get up to over $50,000 an hour between software, salaries, tangibles and intangibles, vendors, and so forth. And so then a lot of times people say, well, now that's probably talking about creating things from scratch, right? And so my costs in transitioning this courseware from instructor-led training where it already exists into e-learning, that's really not a for-scratch effort, right? So therefore it ought to be cheaper. Well, I would ask you, Dean, I was supposed to Can you back us up one? I think that went too far. Move us forward one from that. Thanks. Is this from scratch? I mean, you tell me, but I would say no. But I would also say that it's certainly not in existence to where there's not going to be some serious amount of dollars and time have to be spent to make it usable on the web. Certainly if we're using the standard of effective and engaging. Again, it's not impossible to do that. It just doesn't come quick, easy, and cheap. That's the one concept I'm trying to get across here. Time-wise, okay, to develop instructor-led training, Brian Chapman's research was it took from 22 hours to 81 hours to develop 1 hour of instructor-led training, depending upon the level of complexity of the material. For example, a lot of things we deal with in the aircraft industry, particularly when we're training pilots, or legal documents where there's a lot of legal precedent to be cited, there's a lot of technical jargon, things like that can be in the upper of that 81 hours to 1 hour of training. E-learning is way more than that even. It takes about 49 hours to 716 hours to develop 1 hour of e-learning, depending again on the complexity, the interactivity, the media, the level of those kinds of things can greatly extend that up towards that 716 hours number. Some people found it's particularly like those interactive games. Trying to back us up one. Like, let's say that we have interactive games and we have offices that might be competing against each other in a game using Second Life figures and things like that to make it engaging between sales forces, let's say, between Singapore and Britain and America, and they're all competing in some project as a part of the learning game. That can be over 2,000 hours of development effort into 1 single hour of learning on the e-learning product of that highly, what you might call level 4 levels of significant complexity and advantage. All right, moving forward, again, we said we're not talking absolutely from scratch, but we're not talking fully developed for the web either. So one caution that I would give you here is that there are quite a few discussions that we need to have with champions about transitioning from the instructor-led world into the e-learning world, and that's a great time to update the course. However, one thing about updating the courses I would caution you about is the potential for updating can lead big time to scope creep, and that's kind of a very fine balance that you're going to have to talk over with them and the subject matter experts, is that these kinds of times and these kinds of dollar amounts, is this update that you're saying needs to be in the course, is that an absolute need to do, or is that an absolute nice to do? And maybe the nice to do needs to wait until we get it actually out there on the web, and then we'll do the nice to do's maybe in a version 1.1 where it wouldn't be as lengthy and as costly to do, and we'd at least meet the schedule of getting the course out on the web. Again, we're going to have to write scripts and tape audio a lot of times, certainly in level 2 and above levels of interactivity and so forth in e-learning that wouldn't be a consideration in an existing lead product today. And then also, we're going to have a lot of need for graphics. Whenever I go to a first meeting with somebody that's wanting to talk about transitioning an instructor-led course to an e-learning course, that's one of the first things I say is that we need lots and lots of graphics for this course, and way more than they probably got in the instructor-led course. A good rule of thumb that I like to use with them is you can give me 10 times the graphics that you have in your instructor-led product to start with as an idea for how many graphics and how much quantity of graphics we need to develop your e-learning course. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to use all 10 times what they have given me or what they might have in an instructor-led course. What that is telling them, though, is that I would rather have 50 graphics and use 5 of them as opposed to having 5 from the instructor-led course and have enough audio and screen time playing to the learner that the learner wishes there were 50 graphics there to keep them engaged. In research, one of the most common complaints about e-learning courses is one of two extremes. There were either not enough graphics or there were too many graphics. And that's a real fine line to walk sometimes. The not enough graphics goes back to, say, the electrical schematic in the Navy airplane that's up on the screen for hours and hours, and the graphic never changes. Okay, that's pretty boring to listen to or to watch or whatever. And the other extreme, where you have too many graphics, is a lot of times inexperienced designers or SMEs that are extra thorough insist on having a picture of everything, and they might have a 3-sentence stage script, and they want to show 50 pictures during that 3-sentence audio, and it's like going by so fast, flash, 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 that the poor learner feels like they're just getting flicker vertigo watching all these things flash on the screen, but they're not being able to process the images that they see. And as you as professional training people know, we call that in the educational psychology world cognitive overload. Okay, we're giving them so many things to try to absorb on that screen, showing them too many graphics, that their brains are just flat out overloaded and they can't figure out what they're supposed to get in the way of a learning objective out of that visual. So that's the other extreme. But a lot of times, what's existing number of graphics and the kinds and qualities of graphics that exist in current instructor-led training, again, remember, was developed as a supplemental tool for the instructor, not the other way around, is a lot of times not enough graphics for us to use for an e-learning course. So we need to get across to the SMEs and the course champion. We need a lot of extra graphics, and so we're going to need some budget of both time and money and access to do that. And the list just goes on and on about the extras that we want to make sure that they understand. But again, when it comes to updating and adding things to the course, we don't want to open the door there to too much scope creep, or this project can get really out of hand really quick, because the old excuse will become, well, as long as you're doing this, why don't we do that and this over here? And before long, this course has grown immensely in scope beyond what it was meant to do as it was beginning to be brought into the digital world. And that's what I'm going to talk a lot about later in detail, is these issues of what we've been talking about here in terms of scope creep and extra audios and graphics and so forth, and how to process manage all of that and project manage all of that as we bring it into a digital world. And we'll cover that in more detail in the webinar sometime here in the first quarter, whenever we schedule that to be. And there'll be more information on that. And it's very important that we take out of this little discussion today, and I'm just about done, that we're not trying to give our SMEs sticker shock, all right? But we do need to coach them into a proper understanding of what this project really does entail when we say we're going to bring it from the digital world, or from the instructor-led world, I'm sorry, into the digital world. And if all we're doing is checking a box, and really we're getting back to that 9% effectivity, I don't think that's really why they want to go through all the effort of doing this. They want to do it in such a way that it accomplishes some kind of organizational objective. And that's where it's up to us to coach the champions and coach the SMEs to frame those visions and those discussions to have a good understanding of what this project really is, so we can project manage it effectively for them and develop it into some kind of effective training product out there in the world. Okay, Dean, I think we're kind of bumping up against our 45 minutes here. Do we have time to make a list of some coaching topics, or do you want to just call it good here? Absolutely. Sounds good to me. Well, thanks everyone for listening to me today and dealing with this. I wish I was there to do that in person, but as Dean and all the people at NexLearn, we're all getting an expert experience here at adapting, improvising, and overcoming today with this weather. So I appreciate your attention and your feedback from the floor, and I look forward to seeing each of you in the upcoming webinar when we have that later on. Dean, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.